Ma'am, good morning. Could you please take a seat and state and spell your name for the record for us?
My name is Meredith McCaskill, and it's spelled MEredithMcCaskill.
Thank you. Mr. J, you may inquire.
Thank you. Where do you work, ma'am?
I am employed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the Orlando Regional Operations Center.
And is that also called FDLE?
Yes, it is.
And what do you do for FDLE?
I am a senior crime laboratory analyst in the biology DNA section.
And what is your educational background? And we'll get into training and experience as well, but what's your educational background that allows you to do that job?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences from Clemson University and a Master of Science in Biomedical Forensic Science from the Boston University School of Medicine.
And when did you first start working for FDLE?
I started at FDLE in April of 2011.
Did you have any prior work experience as a forensic examiner of blood or biological or DNA evidence?
No, I did not.
So for the last 13 years, your experience has been with the FDLE?
Yes, that's correct.
And do you have any sort of in-house training and then continuing education that goes on as an employee at FDLE?
Yes, so when you become a crime laboratory analyst, you have to successfully complete a training program. This training program takes about 1.5 to 2 years. It covers all of our policies and procedures and manuals, reading textbooks and scientific articles, and performing a lot of in-house testing and training under the supervision of a qualified analyst. There's also written and oral examinations, and you have to successfully complete every part of that in order to work cases as a crime laboratory analyst. And then every year we have continuing education. So that's education that we need to do in order to stay current with new trends and technologies in the field.
Does the lab itself enjoy any accreditations, and what process, if so, does it go through to get them?
Yes, FDLE is accredited by an organization called ANAB. It's the American National Standards Institute National Accreditation Board. So we've been accredited for, I believe, over 30 years. It's a process where every 4 years they send people to come and inspect our lab, make sure that we're doing everything that we're supposed to be doing according to our policies and procedures, and then we're also following national standards that have been set down. That's every 4 years. It's very in-depth, and then we have additional kind of like spot checks every year just to make sure that we are maintaining everything that we are supposed to be doing.
Have you ever given testimony in court about your opinion about serology analysis or DNA analysis?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
Approximately 35 to 40 times.
Have you ever not been allowed to give opinion testimony in those areas?
No, I have not.
Can you tell us about the place, particularly within FDLE? Tell us about your workspace and what personal protection equipment you may wear when you're doing DNA analysis.
Yes, so in my workspace, I have what I call a clean side, which is where I keep all of my paperwork. And then I have my other side, which is used for actual screening of evidence items. So this is a surface where I can clean it with a detergent. I clean all of the instruments that I'm using, so scissors, markers to take notes, anything like that is cleaned with a detergent, both before I start and after I finish. And it's cleaned and maintained in between every item of evidence. So only one item of evidence is open at a time, and this is to minimize any potential contamination, so DNA from one item getting into DNA from a second item. I also wear what is called personal protective equipment. This includes a lab coat, face mask, gloves, and potentially a hairnet, depending on what type of evidence that I'm working with. And then the gloves are disposable, so they are changed before and after each item of evidence. It's also changed if I have to touch my computer to take notes, I change my gloves. If I have to touch another surface, I change my gloves. So it's a lot of procedures that we use in order to prevent my DNA from getting onto the item of evidence.
When DNA analysis is done, are instruments used to assist you in that process?
Yes, we have an instrument platform that we use that allows us to run the DNA in batches in a efficient manner. So there's multiple instruments that are used across the varying processes.
And do these instruments generate paperwork that humans such as yourself can then go read and interpret?
Yes, it does.
Now, in this particular case, you are not the analyst who examined the items. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Did you review the information that is generated by the instruments used by the analyst who did this work in coming to your own conclusions?
I was the technical reviewer on this file, so I reviewed all of the documentation and the paperwork and also the original analyst report.
All right. Now, one of the items that is said to have been analyzed was a DNA card. Are you familiar with what that is?
Yes, I am.
And can you tell the jury what that is?
Usually it's referred to as a DNA card or a bloodstain card, and that's just a card where somebody can spot blood, usually human blood, on it and dry it down. Then the analyst can take a cutting of that stained area in order to generate a DNA profile.
And is that typically the manner in which a decedent or a dead person's DNA sample is provided to the lab for analysis?
Yes, that's a very common thing that we see in decedents.
And can you explain to the jury how it is an analyst such as yourself would take that blood stain on a portion of the DNA card and develop a DNA profile?
Yes, so it usually is blood stained on the card, so you can identify that stain visually, take a cutting of that stained area, and then place that cutting into a sterile tube, which is then sent through the DNA process. So that's adding chemicals and heat in order to break the cells open and release the DNA into the solution, and then running it through the rest of the procedures where we determine about how much DNA is in the sample, make millions of copies of our specific areas of interest, and then generate a DNA profile that can be used for comparison to any questioned items in the case.
Do you use some sort of commercial kit to develop DNA profiles on known items such as this?
Yes, we do.
Approximately how many locations back in 2020 would have been tested on this DNA card?
In 2020, it was 21 locations.
All right. And in going through this process, is there a process that amplifies the amount of DNA?
Yes, there is.
Can you describe that?
Yes, so we need to amplify or make millions of copies of the specific areas of interest that we're looking for. We don't want to make copies of the entire DNA molecule. We're just wanting to isolate those specific 21 areas and make copies of those specific areas in order to generate the DNA profile that we use in forensic DNA analysis.
And do you know what a short tandem repeat is?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
Short tandem repeat, we also call them STRs. That's just what we're looking for in the forensic DNA analysis. There are short areas of repeating DNA pieces. So, for example, at somebody's DNA profile at a specific location, you can have a set of 16 repeats and a set of 17 repeats. And that's just this one little piece of DNA, and it repeats 16 times. And then you have a piece that repeats 17 times. And it's the number of repeats that is different from person to person.
And you said you might be a 16 at one spot and 17. Let's just be clear what we're talking about. On one particular location, or well, all of them, do you get DNA from mom and dad? Can you explain that?
Yes, so you get DNA from your parents. So it's inherited. You get half of your DNA from your mom and half from your dad. So when I'm talking about the short tandem repeats and the example of a 16 and a 17, that could mean that you got a set of 16 repeats from one parent and a set of 17 repeats from the other parent. So it's just the copies that you get from your parents.
And you might happen to have 16 from each.
Yes, that's also a possibility.
All right, and so the chemicals end up copying about, you said 21 areas in 2020?
Yes, so there's 21, and then we look at several areas that are on the gender marker, so it was 3 areas on the gender markers.
And each of these locations will come up with some sort of number like 16, 17, 4, 4, so on and so forth.
Yes, that's correct.
Were you in reviewing the instrumentation data in this case, Was the DNA profile that was said to have come from Mr. Torres, was there able to be a full DNA profile at those 21 locations developed?
Yes, a complete profile was obtained for that sample.
Now, can you tell us what a buccal or a buccal swab, sometimes people call it each, which way is the right way?
I usually use the word buccal, but buccal is not incorrect either.
All right, and what is that?
It's just a swab that we can use as a reference sample from a person. So it looks, all of our swabs just kind of look like a long Q-tip with only one end. And then you just take that cotton tip end and rub it on the interior of your mouth to get a good DNA sample. You have a lot of cells on the inside of your mouth and a lot of saliva. So that's a good source to use for a known sample from a person.
And these long Q-tips, I believe, as you described, are they put into a box that is designed in a way so that the Q-tip doesn't touch the edges of the box?
Yes, I've seen it in boxes like that, but I have also seen it where they've been put back into the original paper packet container. So either method is fine.
And did the FDLE in this particular case, in the data that you reviewed, was there buccal swabs represented as being from the defendant, Sarah Boone?
Yes, there was.
And in the process that you've briefly described for the jury already, can you just tell us if it's different in any way to take a part of that cotton swab to develop a DNA profile than a piece of the DNA paper?
No, it's the same process. With the buccal swabs, I'm just taking a small cutting of the cotton area of the swab, placing it in a tube, and then running it through the exact same DNA process.
And was a full profile at the 21 locations able to be developed for the buccal swabs represented as being from Ms. Boone?
Yes, a complete profile was obtained for that sample.
Were there also what we call unknown samples that were examined in this case?
Yes, there were.
And can you describe the difference between a known and an unknown sample for the jury?
Yes, a known sample is a sample from a specific person. So that's like the example of a buccal swab. I know that sample came from that individual, and I can use that as a way to determine that particular person's DNA profile. An unknown sample is just a sample where we don't know whose DNA or if there is any DNA on that sample at all. So those are question items that can be, once a DNA profile is obtained from that item, can be compared to the known profiles obtained from individuals.
And in this case, was there an unknown item labeled as DNA swabs representative coming from Mr. Torres's fingernails?
I believe it was fingernail clippings from Mr. Torres, yes.
All right, and typically, I know you didn't do the work on this particular case, but in reviewing the notes and in your experience, do these DNA samples from fingernail clippings come in as swabs, like a buccal swab?
So sometimes they can come in as swabs, but other times they come in as just fingernail clippings, so taking the clippers and just cutting off the ends of the fingernails. And then I've also seen it where they've been scraped using pointed sticks.
And so if there is a swab that came in represented as being from the fingernails, then that would go through the process of as you previously described for the buccal swabs.
Yes, that's correct.
And if it comes in as fingernails or scrapings, do you all have to make your own swabs?
Yes, that's correct.
And how would you go about doing that?
We have prepackaged swabs in our lab. We can then use some sterile deionized water and drip that onto the end of the cotton tip to make it a little bit moist so that it can pick up any DNA that is left on the item. And then we just swab the surface of the item, allow the swab to dry, and then cut it and place it into a tube for the DNA process. So we're just making our own swabs at that point.
And was there a profile obtained from what was represented as being a DNA sample from Mr. Torres's fingernail clippings?
Yes, there was.
And did it match either of the two known profiles that we've just discussed here this morning?
Yes, it did.
Which one?
Mr. Torres.
Were there any results indicating foreign DNA on this item?
No, there were no DNA results foreign to Mr. Torres obtained from either set of fingernail clippings.
Likewise, was there something examined in this case represented to be swabs or DNA samples from Ms. Boone, the defendant's fingernails?
Yes, those were swabs that were sent, represented as being from her fingernails.
And so just like the buccal swabs, they come in as a Q-tip, and then you would test that in a similar manner?
Yes, that's correct.
Was a profile able to be developed from what was represented as being swabs from Ms. Boone's fingernails?
Yes, there was.
And did that profile match either of the two known profiles that we've been discussing this morning?
Yes, it did.
And whose was that?
Miss Boone's.
Now, in regards to both of these last items that we've talked about, the fingernail swabs from each Mr. Torres and Ms. Boone, is it expected that their profile would be developed from DNA swabs from their fingernails?
Yes, it is. All of those samples were represented as being from those particular individuals, so their DNA is expected to be on those items.
Was there any DNA foreign to Ms. Boone on those samples that were representative as coming from her fingernails?
No, there were no DNA results foreign to Miss Boone obtained from either set of fingernail swabs.
Now, with this amplification process that you've described, is it PCR?
Yes, it is.
How sensitive is it when, a sample is taken from an unknown area, such as fingernails?
The PCR process is pretty sensitive, and over the years, as the science has evolved and testing has changed, the process has become even more sensitive over the years.
And hypothetically, if two people are living together and are intimate partners, quite frankly, would you expect the intimate partner's DNA to show up on swabbings from their fingernails?
Yes, it's possible that their DNA would show up if they're in close contact with each other.
But in this particular case, after reviewing all of the instrumentation data, there was no DNA foreign to either of their fingernail clippers, both clippings or swabs from their fingernails, both Mr. Torres and Ms. Boone.
Yes, that's correct.
No other questions?
Any cross-examination?
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Once you develop a profile, are you able to take that profile and compare it to other possible DNA on objects or items?
Well, if it's a DNA profile that is obtained from a questioned item, we can compare that to profiles from known individuals.
And in this case, an example of that, if an object from an unknown source, you could take that and compare it to a known profile. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And if you get a match with that comparison, what can you take from that?
Just that is the DNA profiles are the same.
So if it's an object, let's say like a bat, and there's a DNA profile that's obtained from the bat, and it matches a known profile, could you make the conclusion that that person touched or handled that bat from the known profile?
No, I can't. There's nothing in the testing that we do at FDLE that will allow me to determine how any DNA ended up on an object or how long it's been on that object.
Now, you said that in this case, what was sent for DNA comparison?
In this case, there was a blood stain card or a DNA card represented as being from Mr. Torres, buccal swabs represented as being from Miss Boone, fingernail clippings from both hands represented as being from Mr. Torres, and then fingernail swabs from both hands represented as being from Miss Boone.
Those are the only items that were sent to your lab for comparison.
Those were the only items sent to the DNA lab, yes.
Thank you, ma'am. I have no further questions.
Any redirect examination?
No redirection can be excused as far as the state is concerned.
Defense?
Yes.
All right, ma'am, you're excused. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.